Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 19 of Compliance Into the Weeds, a podcast with Tom Fox and Matt Kelly, where we take a deep dive into the weeds in some topic or area of compliance. Today, we take a look at a couple of blog posts Matt has put up this week around the Securities and Exchange Commission and Dodd-Frank going forward in light of the election of Donald Trump. Matt discusses the Trump risk effect that is now showing up in corporate disclosures. And in our discussion about the SEC, Matt really had some very interesting points about what does it mean to repeal Dodd-Frank, and that when people talk about that, they're really talking about easing rules for capital formation. We take a look at Paul Adkins, who is leading the Trump transition for the Securities and Exchange Commission, and what his experience at the SEC might or might not tell us. And finally, we take a look at the issue of whistleblowers and why neither one of us think that's going away. I really think it is in large part because of the whistleblower bar. The episode comes in at just over 18 minutes. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Compliance Into the Weeds with my good friend and colleague, Matt Kelly. Matt, welcome.
Hello, Tom. Good to talk to you again.
Well, Matt, we have certainly had an interesting week around the compliance function, discipline, gestalt, whatever we may want to call it. You've written extensively on this. I have been writing on it. Roy Snell has now weighed in, so it's been a really interesting week. But you have had two posts up this week. Actually, we've had four, but we're going to have to just say Kevin O'Connor, we hardly knew ye for those two posts. But you had a post called "It's Starting: A Disclosure of the Trump Risk," and then you had a post entitled "Compliance in the Trump Era, Part 1, the SEC." And I wanted to see if maybe you could tell us what the Trump risk is, where you see it, and where you see it might be going.
Well, I think we will see it in dribs and drabs right now as companies start to disclose potential risk factors of having a Trump administration in their corporate filings. We've already seen two. The very first was a materials and components company up in Rhode Island. I think we will see more. What are we actually supposed to disclose there? I think it's going to be numerous variations on "we don't know," "we're not sure," because Trump himself, and I think everybody in his administration, is still in the "we don't know, we're not sure what we're doing." But, Trump, it is going to be, it could be a sea change in the speed of legislation and rules getting adopted in Washington. Whether you like them or not, a unified Republican legislative and executive, they're going to be able to get what they want done. What do they want done? We don't know. But companies in healthcare, companies in potentially free trade and manufacturing, if they've got extended supply chains or a lot of international customers, companies that are in retail, I've seen some concerns there. Companies that rely on a lot of what we will diplomatically call labor of uncertain origins. If you're in agriculture, if you are in probably some construction trades, you might depend on a lot of undocumented immigrants that suddenly might not be there. We're going to see a lot of these things. I think we're going to see a lot more disclosure by early spring, but I was surprised. The very first company to file a Trump risk disclosure was filed at 4:41 p.m. the day after Trump won the presidency. So that's how quickly this has started.
I guess one of the observations in your post was that companies need to have some nimbleness around what is risk, because even perhaps a week or maybe 2 weeks ago, this was not a disclosable risk or a material risk. And all of a sudden, 441 on November 9th, it became a material risk, so that the company had to disclose it. So I think companies need to maybe think through how they think about risk. Does any of that resonate with you?
I think so, and hats off to these two companies that filed their Trump disclosures that day after on Wednesday. Really, your corporate secretary and your filing agent are pretty deft on their feet to be able to turn that around, but they did. And sure, cynics are going to say that risk factors that get disclosed in quarterly filings, they're always vague. And these were vague. One was concerned about renewable energy credits maybe going away. One was a healthcare company that was concerned about repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And they basically said these things might happen. They might have a material effect on our business. They've disclosed it. They've done their duty. Is that really informative to any investor with a pulse? Probably not, but it's out there. I do think 6 months from now, once the Trump administration has been in office and we're in like first and second quarter filings in 2017, we're going to see a whole lot more specificity around it. But even then, how specific will it be? We don't know. And now this black swan of a President Trump, this has happened. This is going to come. So now people already know they're going to have to disclose it, discuss it somehow.
Thank you for using my favorite word in the history of the world, specificity, for this podcast. So
sure.
You get a double kudos for that. So let me turn now to your blog post on compliance in the Trump era, because you said you laid out an argument in a way that no one else has made. It's really, I thought, three parts. If we leave out the Mary Jo White resignation, which a lot of people have commented on, but I'm going to start at the end, because the thing that struck me that you said the most succinctly that people are just not focusing on is that repealing Dodd-Frank really means easing rules for capital formation. That's not a compliance function. That's a capital formation function, and it's bank leverage, it's private equity leverage, and it's a host of other rules that really have nothing to do with the modern compliance profession. Or is that analysis just off base?
Yes, it does. I wouldn't necessarily say that they don't have anything to do with the compliance profession. It really, if you define it broadly, for many people who think of corporate ethics and compliance function as we tend to talk about it, a lot of these capital formation rules are going to be somewhat off to the side of their radar screen, and that's where it is. But for financial services people, for those businesses that are in asset management, hedge funds, like you mentioned, large banks with systemic risk, and where risk management and internal control and corporate compliance are all very blurry, this is going to be all up in their face. We don't know how. I would be somewhat cynical here that we see a lot of confusion about who might lead the Trump administration and what their priorities are in most places, most parts of government. However, if you think that this is just a rich white guy with a bunch of other rich white guy friends, why would we be surprised? The one part of their administration where they do seem to have a plan is on relaxing capital formation so rich white guys can do more business on Wall Street and make more money. None of that is shocking to me, that we have hedge fund tycoons who are in the race to be the Treasury Secretary, and that Paul Adkins, who is leading the transition for SEC and related agencies. They've all been about how do we do more of the relaxation we saw from the Jobs Act of 2012. That's the sort of thing that's what they're focusing on right now.
The second thing you did in this blog post was we tracked through his involvement with Securities and Exchange Commission in the first decade of this century. Well, the way you framed it, Matt, you talked about the issues that the SEC faced in the early 2000s and in the later 2000s are in some ways very different than the issues the SEC faces in 2016. And so to look at him from that perspective may not provide an entire view. So could you just walk us through that, because I was fascinated by that.
Well, yeah, sure. I think, you have to remember that Paul Adkins, who was in the SEC when I was in my formative early years writing about corporate compliance, he was a Republican commissioner. He was there at a time when the entire SEC in the mid-2000s was rather dysfunctional, and all five commissioners basically did not particularly like any of the other four, regardless of party affiliation. But they were struggling with things like implementing the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. They were struggling with a wave of financial restatements, how to punish companies that had committed large-scale financial fraud. And this was all in the news and on their agenda 2003, 2004, 2005. What was not really a big SEC priority back then? Well, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act really didn't pick up until much later. A lot of the systemic risks that blew up in the financial crisis, they were not on the SEC's radar screen in the mid-2000s. The SEC was really asleep at the switch. That was not Paul Adkins' fault. That was the chairman at the time's fault. But, they were thinking through things more like trading rules, hedge fund registration, which the hedge funds did not like. There was some talk about whistleblower protections. Paul Adkins was in favor of requiring internal reporting before you could be eligible for a whistleblower reward. But a lot of the conversation has moved past those issues now. We've got some very different issues that we are thinking about these days, such as FCPA enforcement, which is a big deal. Accounting restatements are way down compared to where they were a decade ago. Whistleblower protections, that's really moved beyond the idea that, we're going to start repealing some protections. I don't know that politically that's going to work. Then again, it's not necessarily something, I don't know that Donald Trump is really going to care that politically it's going to look bad. We don't know.
And then finally, Matt, you really focus on whistleblowers, and you really packed a lot into just a few paragraphs, really starting with, think about, guys, how do you repeal Dodd-Frank? And what does that mean? What does the 2,000 pages of regulations mean vis-a-vis the law that was passed, particularly Section 922 with regard to whistleblowers? So why don't you kind of walk us through that as well?
Well, I can remember when Section 922, which created a whistleblower rewards program, when that first came around, a lot of compliance officers did not like it. They did not like that there was no internal reporting requirement before you could then go and be eligible for a whistleblower reward. A lot of people thought that internal complaints or reports of misconduct would plummet. None of that has come to pass. The SEC is getting a lot of tips. Internal compliance hotlines and the internal allegations are still coming along. Most allegations of misconduct are first reported internally still. So I think that for people now to say we're going to go back and require internal reporting, like, why? Why are we going and relitigating something that is no longer a problem? It was an interesting idea that never actually became a problem. So I don't think that is going to happen. Technically, probably there are lawyers smarter than me who could read some of the language of the statute, but the statute of Dodd-Frank doesn't say there shall be an office of the whistleblower. It just says the program has to be established. Could they get rid of the office of the whistleblower but still somehow allow rewards? I think maybe somebody could try to make that argument. I don't think it's necessarily going to be wise or politically astute or optically popular, to put it, I guess, in sort of political PR terms. Plus, there's a lot of people in Congress who like the idea of whistleblower protections. They like it for people to rat out government misconduct and abuses against the government more than they're thinking really about corporate abuses. But Chuck Grassley, who is head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he's all in favor of whistleblower protections, so you can say the government is being scammed. There are going to be powerful voices there who are not really looking to dial back whistleblower protections. We'll still probably see some sort of fine-tuning, but I don't really know that this is where the SEC's new leadership is going to hit their first fight. Like I said, for them, really, it's about capital formation and repealing financial sector regulation.
I guess on the whistleblower issue, the other thing that I've been thinking about, Matt, is that there is really now a private whistleblower bar, and they are driving many SEC whistleblower cases because they screen cases, they evaluate cases, and then they take cases that they think, they being the lawyers, they're going to make money on. And they package them in ways they could present to the SEC to get the quickest, most expeditious result possible. So this is almost similar to the DOJ outsourcing of internal investigations, albeit with a positive penalty, a positive benefit rather than a smaller penalty or a declination. So that this outsourcing of the Dodd-Frank whistleblower protections, outsourcing of the whistleblower to this whistleblower bar may be one of the saving graces as well.
I think so. And, frankly, if we want to be cynical about it, if I were a Republican SEC chairman who did not really like whistleblower rewards, I would just slow roll enforcement activities into the companies, and I would settle for not a lot of money. And then, sure, the whistleblower still gets 10 to 30%, but he gets 10 to 30% of not a lot of money. And, perhaps these sort of doctrinal changes about retaliation and whatnot, maybe you just don't really enforce against companies for that. There will be other ways for Republicans to get the sort of corporate-friendly treatment some cynics out there might say that they want, without necessarily repealing or abolishing policy and legislative abilities that they have.
So, Matt, it's certainly been an interesting week. Really some interesting points you've raised. I'm sure we'll be just continuing the discussion into the weeds as we're going to continue the discussion with our larger group on everything compliance. So until then, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Take care.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds, a podcast with Tom Fox and Matt Kelly. I have two calls to action for you. The first is if you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, if you would rate it. I recognize the sound is of crap quality today. I apologize for that. We had some recording issues with our software. But also, we're developing a mailbag episode. So if you have any questions that you'd like a deep dive into, please email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com or Matt Kelly at mkelly@radicalcompliance.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds.